Everyone's seen the movies. The ripped prehistoric dude with his bone club, hunting mammoths, living free under the stars. No boss, no mortgage, no Monday morning stand-up meetings. Honestly, it sounds kind of amazing. It sounds like permanent camping, but make it aesthetic. Right now, part of you is probably thinking, the cave life couldn't have been that bad. Let me completely destroy that fantasy for you in the next few minutes. You're born roughly 30,000 years ago, during the Upper Paleolithic, in what we'd now call Europe. You don't have a name yet. You're just the new baby. And the simple fact that you arrived alive is already your first win, because in this world, being born is the first obstacle in an obstacle course that doesn't end until you die. Which, spoiler alert, is going to happen pretty soon. Your world has no name, no borders, no written history, obviously, because writing hasn't been invented yet. What does exist is this: cold. A cold that people today genuinely cannot comprehend. We're in the Upper Paleolithic, which means the last ice age still has Europe in a chokehold. Winter temperatures on the open plains can drop to 30 degrees below zero. There are no stores, no down jackets, nothing standing between you and that cold, except animal hides that someone in your group had to kill to get. And this is the first thing you need to understand about your life. Everything, absolutely everything, costs enormous effort and carries a real risk of death. The birth itself is already a coin flip. Your mother has zero access to medical care. The infant mortality rate during the Paleolithic is estimated between 40 and 60% in the first years of life. That means 4 to 6 out of every 10 babies born in your group die before they turn 5. Infections, exposure, starvation, diseases that have no treatment because the treatment hasn't been invented yet. You just won the first lottery of your life. Congratulations, you're alive. Your mother wraps you in animal hide. The smell is the first thing that defines you as a human being. Roughly cured meat, animal fat, wood smoke, damp earth. That is the cologne of your world. That smell will be with you every single second of your existence. When you're an adult, you won't know there's any other way to smell the world, because you've never smelled anything different. The group you're born into has between 20 and 50 people. That is your entire humanity. That is your whole world. There are elders, which in this context means anyone who made it to 40. There are adults in their physical prime, who are the ones actually keeping everyone alive. There are teenagers learning the ropes, and there are children like you. What's about to begin for you is a childhood that looks absolutely nothing like what that word means today. You're 2 years old and already walking. Motor development has to be fast because a child who can't move under their own power is dead weight the group can't afford when they need to move urgently. And urgent movement happens way more often than you'd like. Your group is nomadic. They follow the animals, the seasonal plants, the weather patterns. The cave they're in right now might be home for months, or it might be a 2-day stop before moving on. When you're too small to walk the distances, someone carries you. But that ends quickly, because carrying a kid burns energy someone else needs for survival. By 3, you're observing. By 4, copying. Learning in the Paleolithic doesn't involve books or structured lessons. It works through direct observation, imitation, and practice with real consequences. Archaeologists have actually found tools clearly made by unskilled hands right alongside adult ones at Paleolithic sites. evidence that kids had access to the same raw materials to practice with. This wasn't a play area. This was job training, starting extremely young. And the material you're working with is not forgiving. Flint, the main stone used for tools in your era, is basically natural glass. Freshly napped edges can cut through human skin without any effort at all. You will cut your hands learning to work flint. That's not a possibility. That's a guarantee. The only question is how often and how deep. But honestly, the cut hands are basically a minor inconvenience compared to what comes next. You're 6 years old, and you already understand the fundamental structure of your world. There is food, and there is no food. There is danger, and there is no danger. There is winter, and there is no winter. Everything else is a detail. Fire is the most sacred thing in your universe. Not metaphorically, fire is the literal difference between alive and dead. It keeps you warm when the cold would kill you. It cooks the meat. It keeps predators away at night. It lights the cave. It hardens the tips of wooden spears. Fire is technology, medicine, security, and home all at once. And keeping it going is a group responsibility. Reigniting it when it goes out can take anywhere from 15 minutes to several hours, depending on conditions, humidity, and the skill of whoever's doing it. There are no matches, no lighters. There's wood friction or sparks from striking flint against iron pyrite. And there's sweat, and there's frustration, and there's the wind that blows it all out right when you are almost there. As a kid, collecting firewood is one of your main jobs. Dry firewood specifically, because wet wood produces smoke instead of fire, and smoke inside a closed cave is genuinely dangerous. You learn to tell dry wood from wet, which branches burn best, which ones produce coals that last through the night. This sounds like an adorable little camping lesson. It is not. You do this because if the fire goes out in the middle of winter, the temperature inside the cave can drop to lethal levels within hours for the most vulnerable members of the group. You are in the vulnerable category. Because here's the thing. Everyone assumes the biggest danger of the Paleolithic was the animals. The mammoths, the cave bears, the cave lions. And yes, those are real threats. We'll get there. But the greatest danger in your everyday life has no fangs and no claws. It's hunger. Hunger in the Paleolithic isn't skipping lunch or being a little peckish before dinner. It's multiple days in a row without enough food. It's weeks in winter when the animals aren't where they're supposed to be, or when the cold makes hunting impossible for extended stretches. It's the slow accumulation of weakness in a body that needs thousands of calories a day in a freezing environment and simply isn't getting them. Studies of Paleolithic skeletal remains show clear evidence of starvation episodes. Harris lines, which are marks in the bones where growth stopped during periods of severe nutritional stress and then resumed. Your bones literally keep a record of every time you starved badly. And in most Paleolithic skeletons that have been found, there are multiple such marks. You will go hungry, not once, not twice. Regularly, as a normal part of your life cycle. And when there is food, there is a hierarchy about who eats what and how much. Adult hunters, the ones who bring in the protein, eat first. Pregnant or nursing women get some priority. Children eat what's left. The elderly eat whatever remains from what's left. And in times of true scarcity, the weakest elders may simply not get enough to survive. This isn't cruelty. It's math. And you, as a child, understand this hierarchy before you have the words to describe it. You're 9 or 10 years old and the training intensifies. Boys start accompanying the adult hunters on short observation trips. Girls deepen their work in hide processing, food preparation, systematic gathering of plants, berries, roots, seeds, and edible insects, and caring for the younger children. And we need to pause here for a second, because the image of the Paleolithic man as the exclusive hunter, while women were passive gatherers, is a massive oversimplification that modern archaeology has been dismantling for decades. Gathering provided between 50 and 80% of the group's calories in many environments. Hunting was more unpredictable, more dangerous, required more energy, and failed more often. The women managing food collection were, in many ways, more consistently productive for the group's survival than the hunters. But that doesn't make life particularly great for either one of them. For you, learning to hunt, the process goes like this. First, silence. Hours moving so slowly that the effort is exhausting in a way that goes beyond the physical. Total awareness of the wind, because if it carries your scent towards the animal before you're in position, all that time is wasted and the animal bolts. And when the animal you're approaching weighs 4 times what you do and has horns that could gut you like a fish, the risk calculation becomes pretty obvious pretty fast. Later in the Upper Paleolithic, the spear thrower will be invented, a device that artificially extends the hunter's arm and multiplies the force of the throw, allowing faster projectiles at greater range. It's essentially the first mechanical device ever designed specifically to kill at a distance. You basically invented applied physics without knowing it. The animals of your era aren't anything you'd see in a European zoo today. Steppe bison, considerably larger and more aggressive than modern ones. Giant deer with antlers spanning more than 3 meters tip to tip. Woolly rhinos. And yes, mammoths, not everywhere, and not at all times, but in enough regions to be a very real presence in many Upper Paleolithic groups' lives. Nobody hunts a mammoth alone. Nobody with any survival instinct anyway. Mammoth hunting is a full group effort requiring planning, coordination, and the willingness of some members to put themselves in positions of extreme danger to create the chaos needed to separate an individual from the herd or drive it toward a trap. Archaeological evidence at kill sites suggests they sometimes used natural cliffs, swampy ground, or ravines where the animal would get stuck. Stuck and vulnerable, in this context, means a mammoth that can't escape is a mammoth that will try to destroy everything around it with the force and desperation of several thousand kilograms of prehistoric animal that knows it's in danger. Adult mammoths could weigh between 4,000 and 8,000 kilograms. They had tusks up to 3 meters long. Their skin was thick and their build massive. To kill one, you need to get your spears into vulnerable spots: the eyes, the mouth, the softer hide of the abdomen, which means getting dangerously close to something doing everything it can to flatten you. You will participate in hunts like this. Maybe you survive all of them. Maybe you don't. What comes after a successful big game hunt is brutal work of a different kind: butchering. Hundreds of kilograms of meat, fat, bone, and organs processed with stone tools. Organs get eaten first, fresh, because they don't keep. Liver, heart, kidneys. Bone marrow is extracted by cracking the bones open. Nothing gets wasted, when you have no idea when the next abundant meal is coming. The smell of the whole operation is something the modern imagination genuinely struggles with. It's not just blood. It's dozens of kilos of open viscera, the contents of the animal's digestive system, coagulated blood and animal fat warming in the air. An odor that attracts every other predator in the area. Which means while you're processing your kill, you need to keep watching the tree line. Because you are not alone in your ecological niche. European cave lions were between 30 and 50% larger than modern African lions. Cave bears, primarily herbivores, but capable of being extremely dangerous when threatened or startled, had skulls that in some individuals were 3 times the size of an adult human skull. Pleistocene spotted hyenas ran in clans large enough to steal kills directly from human groups. Night is the highest danger period. The fire at the cave entrance works as a psychological and practical barrier against most predators, but not all. And in the Paleolithic, nights are long. In winter, at European latitudes, darkness can start in the early afternoon and not lift until mid-morning. You spend many hours in the darkness of the cave, listening to sounds from outside, interpreting whether a branch snapping or a distant sound is just the wind or something you need to deal with. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherer populations found something fascinating. They don't sleep 8 solid hours in one block. Instead, they have periods of light sleep interrupted by brief periods of waking, which makes perfect evolutionary sense. Sleep too deeply, and you might not wake up at all. Your nervous system is factory configured to never fully relax. And there's archaeological proof this wasn't paranoia. Bite marks from large carnivores have been found on human bones. This isn't theory. It's history carved into the bones themselves. You're 15, 16 years old, and you're technically an adult. Not because any formal ceremony declared it, though initiation rituals in Paleolithic societies probably existed in some form, given the evidence of symbolic behavior in the archaeological record. You're an adult in the most practical sense. The group needs you producing, not just consuming. And here's something I need you to understand, because it's one of the most fascinating and exhausting aspects of your existence. You are a specialist in multiple disciplines simultaneously. Toolmaker, hunter, shelter builder, improvised medic, meteorologist, geographer, zoologist. All of this without attending a single class, purely because your survival and your group's survival depend on you knowing how to do all of it. Flint knapping is an art form that experimental archaeologists spent decades reconstructing. It is not hitting a rock with another rock. There are specific sequences of strikes, precise angles, a deep understanding of how flint fractures depending on where and how you hit it. Different tools require entirely different techniques. Scrapers for working hides, burins for engraving and carving, lance points, cutting blades. Each one demands its own method. Good knappers are genuinely valued in the group. A bad spear point can shatter on impact, and there's no hardware store for replacements. But there's another dimension of your life that might be the most surprising thing of all, and it's this. You are an artist. Yes, you. The caveman some people imagine as a brute whose only thoughts are eat, sleep, don't die. The paintings at Altamira in Spain and Lascaux in France were created by people exactly like you. Same brain, same cognitive capacity, same creative potential as any modern human. And they produced art that 20 or 30,000 years later still leaves visitors speechless. The painters used natural rock protrusions to give their figures volume and three-dimensionality. They mixed iron oxide, charcoal, and manganese with animal fat to create pigments that have survived thousands of years. They used hollow bird bones to blow pigment and create gradient effects. The deepest paintings at Lascaux are more than 100 meters from the entrance, in galleries only reachable by crawling through narrow passages. Someone hauled their pigments and fat lamps all the way in there for a reason that clearly went beyond interior decorating. Your group has music. Paleolithic bone flutes have been found that are still playable today. It has rituals, burials with grave goods, red ochre on the bodies of the dead. It has oral history, the stories the elders tell around the fire at night. You are brutally primitive in your material conditions of life, and completely, fully human on the inside. That contradiction is, perhaps, the most devastating thing about your existence. You're 20 years old. The average age of death in the Upper Paleolithic is estimated between 30 and 35. That means you've already burned through somewhere between 50 and 60% of your total lifespan. Sit with that for a second. You're young. You're at your physical peak. You're competent at everything your group needs from you. And according to the statistical expectations of your era, you have maybe 10 to 15 years left. If you're lucky. Now, that 30 to 35 average is heavily skewed by the brutal infant mortality rate. If you survived your first 5 years, your actual life expectancy improves considerably. Skeletal remains show individuals who reached 50, 60, even 70 in exceptional cases. But those exceptional individuals are carrying bodies that tell a very different story than any modern 70-year-old you've ever met. Arthritis is practically universal in middle-aged Paleolithic skeletons. Fractures that healed badly, bones that fused at irregular angles because there was no way to immobilize them properly during recovery. Severe tooth loss, which in the Paleolithic can be genuinely fatal. If you can't chew the tough meat and raw hide that makes up most of your diet, you can't get enough calories to sustain yourself. There's evidence of dental infections that spread to the jawbone, something that today gets treated with antibiotics, and that in your era just kills you. No doctors, no hospitals, no pharmacies. What you have is accumulated empirical knowledge about plants. Willow bark contains the active compound that modern aspirin is derived from. Some plants have antibacterial properties, others are analgesic. But for most actual medical emergencies, the expected outcome is death. An open fracture, bone breaking through the skin, is basically a death sentence from infection. Appendicitis is a death sentence. An abdominal wound from a hunt is a death sentence. A complicated childbirth kills the mother, the baby, or both with alarming regularity. You live knowing that any moderately serious accident might be the end. Not abstractly, the way we think about it today. Concretely and immediately, because you've watched people in your group die from this stuff. Someone you knew, someone you cared about, died from something that today would be solved by a 20-minute doctor's appointment and a prescription. Death in your world is not a philosophical concept. It's a neighbor. By 25, if you're still alive, you almost certainly have a partner and probably children. Love in the Paleolithic exists with the same intensity as in any other period of human history. What's different is how frequently that love becomes grief. Every pregnancy is a source of anxiety that never fully goes away. The birth could kill your partner. The baby could die. And if both survive, the child's first years are relentless vigilance against everything that can end them. Cold, sickness, accidents, animal attacks. You have to produce enough food for your kids while also producing enough for the group to function. The statistics suggest most Paleolithic adults had lost at least one child. Many had lost their partner. Grief is a constant in your emotional life, and yet you have to keep functioning because the group cannot afford to have someone shut down from loss. And here's something I haven't mentioned yet that completely changes the picture. You are not alone on the planet. In your era, Homo sapiens shares the European continent with Neanderthals, though at this point they're in their final millennia, and there's evidence that both species interacted. Not just in the sense of crossing the same territory, but in the genetic sense. Between 1 and 4% of the DNA of people with non-African ancestry today comes from crossbreeding between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals. This is not speculation. This is DNA recovered from fossils and sequenced in a lab. What exactly happened in those encounters, the archaeological record can't show us in detail. What we do know is that by the end of this period, Neanderthals are gone from the fossil record. Competition for resources, diseases they had no immunity to, gradual absorption, violence. The debate is still open. For you, living in this period, their presence nearby is a variable you can't ignore. They're physically powerful, they're intelligent, they're experienced hunters, hostile. Potential allies? Indifferent? Depends on where you are and exactly when. And conflict between human groups also exists. The noble savage living in peaceful harmony with all neighbors is a fantasy that the archaeological record consistently refuses to support. Paleolithic human remains show evidence of intentional trauma. Skull fractures from blunt impacts, projectile wounds, cut marks consistent with post-mortem butchering. Resources are limited. Hunting territories have informal but very real boundaries. Without armor, without a helmet, with nothing between you and incoming violence except the hides you're wearing, armed conflict has fast and brutal consequences. You're 30 years old. If you've made it here, you're statistically remarkable. Most of the people born around the same time as you haven't. Your back hurts chronically. An old leg injury from a hunt 5 years ago flares up and makes you limp for days at a time. You've lost several teeth, which makes eating certain things genuinely difficult and reduces your caloric efficiency. Last winter, you had a chest infection you thought was going to kill you. And it did kill an older man in your group with similar symptoms. You survived, but even now, when the air gets cold enough, you feel something in your chest that wasn't there before. By the standards of your era, you are old. Not ancient, but nobody expects from you the same physical output they did 10 years ago. Your value to the group is shifting towards something else. Accumulated knowledge, judgment, the ability to make decisions based on having seen more winters, more hunts, more crises than most of the people around you. If your group has anything resembling a leadership structure, which is probably informal and earned through respect rather than inherited, you might be starting to occupy that role. When to move and where, how to handle a conflict with another group, when a hunt is too risky, and when it's worth taking. That kind of judgment comes from experience, and the experience is yours. But even that authority doesn't protect you from cold, hunger, disease, or predators. It just gives you a little more say in how the group responds to all of them. And then comes the winter that won't quit. There are periods when the temperatures don't rise enough for vegetation to recover in time. When the animals shift their migration routes in ways your group has never seen before. When hunt after hunt fails and the food reserves run out. In these periods, the group faces decisions that no modern human ever has to make. The abandonment of individuals who can no longer contribute to the group's survival is documented in historical hunter-gatherer cultures and almost certainly existed in the Paleolithic. Not as a standard practice, as an absolute last resort. The elders who can no longer travel, the chronically ill, in some cases newborns with severe disabilities who couldn't survive without constant care. This is the darkest face of Paleolithic life. Not the dangerous hunts, not the cold, not the absence of medicine. This, the line between empathy and survival, the threshold a group can be forced to cross when the margin between living and dying gets too narrow to keep everyone on the right side of it. You have grieved the people you've lost. You have cared for the sick. You have shared food when doing so meant eating less yourself. That is real, and it is not nothing. But you also know, because you've seen it, that there is a threshold where even that care has to yield to the arithmetic of survival. You're 35 years old. By any standard of your era, you are old. Not in the sense that nobody respects you. The knowledge you carry is understood to be valuable. But your body carries decades of extreme physical labor in brutal conditions, and that damage can no longer be ignored. The arthritis in your hands makes flint knapping painful on cold days. Your knees won't take the long pursuit runs anymore. Your eyesight has deteriorated, and in a world with no glasses, where failing to see something clearly can mean the difference between spotting a danger and not spotting it, that's not a small thing. You have scars that each tell a story. The one on your back is from that bison hunt 20 years ago. The one on your left forearm is from a night something got into the cave before you detected it. But you're still valuable. You know where the water source is that doesn't freeze in winter. You know which year the bison took this route, and which year they took the other one. You know which plants kill pain, and which ones just kill you. Anthropologists call this the grandmother hypothesis. The idea that humans live well beyond reproductive age, unlike most animals, because older individuals contribute significantly to their grandchildren's survival through knowledge, care, and resources. In your case, that knowledge is literal survival information. You are a living library that your group cannot afford to lose. That gives you a margin, a small margin. 40 years old. If you've made it here, you are a genuine statistical outlier. There are days when the pain is so constant, you've learned to function through it, like it's just part of the landscape, like wind noise or the smell of smoke. Not because you've chosen to ignore it, because you have no other option. You've buried more people than you'd want to count, and the burial ritual exists in your culture. There's archaeological evidence from Upper Paleolithic sites, grave goods, red ochre on the bodies, an obvious deliberate intention to honor the dead. Your group has some concept of what comes after, or at least that the dead deserve something beyond just being left behind. And as your life moves toward its end, that capacity to imagine, to create, to honor, to remember, that is what actually defines what you are. Not a brainless primitive. A complete human being, trapped in material conditions of life that no modern person could survive for long, doing exactly what humans have always done, trying to stay alive, connecting with others, building meaning in the middle of chaos. The last time you see the outside light, it might be a dawn over a landscape that hasn't changed in thousands of years and won't change for thousands more. The cold of the air, the smell of a fire someone's already lit, the sounds of your group waking up for another day of exactly the same thing as yesterday and the day before that. You hunted animals that weighed more than 10 of you combined. You survived winters that would kill any modern person without specialized gear within days. You crafted tools with the precision and technical knowledge that professional artisans today genuinely admire. You raised children in conditions where half of all children don't survive the first few years. You carried inside your head a complex map of territory, resources, relationships, and knowledge with no written equivalent, because writing doesn't exist yet. And yet, from our warm, comfortable vantage point, we still call you primitive. The irony is truly something. That was what it meant to be born a caveman. Not the adventure the movies promised. Not the romantic freedom of living close to nature. It was 30, maybe 40 years of brutal physical labor, chronic pain, frequent starvation, constant grief, and the permanent nearness of a death that could arrive from dozens of different directions at any moment. And yet your group painted bison on cave walls with the delicacy and skill that holds its own against art from any other era in human history. They made music, they told stories, they buried their dead with care. They loved their children with the same desperate intensity that any parent loves their child today. You survived, or at least you tried everything you had, so that 30,000 years later, someone could sit on a warm couch with a glowing screen and think, man, I'm really glad that wasn't me. Thanks for existing anyway. Without you, literally none of us would be here. If you want to discover more lives you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy, subscribe. The next one is just as brutal. I promise.